Homeless girl was secretly cleaning bathrooms until the owner sees her and breaks down when he learns the truth. Richard Bennett arrived at his restaurant in Arlington every morning expecting to find the bathrooms in a deplorable state, as always happened after a busy day of customers. But for the past 3 weeks, something strange had been going on. It was in the early hours of a Monday that everything changed forever. Richard decided to go to the restaurant earlier to check the inventory when he heard noises coming from the back of the establishment. His heart raced, thinking of burglars, but as he approached the women's restroom, the scene he saw left him completely speechless. A little girl of about 9 years old was kneeling on the floor, vigorously scrubbing the toilet with an old brush. Her brown clothes were soaked and dirty, her messy hair stuck to her sweaty face. The girl worked with impressive dedication, as if this were the most important task of her life. Richard stood frozen at the door, watching the surreal scene. The child hadn't noticed his presence and continued her meticulous cleaning. He noticed she limped slightly as she moved from side to side, and there were strange marks on her thin arms. "What are you doing here?" Richard asked, his voice choked. The girl was so startled she dropped the brush, splashing dirty water everywhere. Her wide eyes showed pure terror, like a cornered animal. She tried to get up quickly to run away, but her bare feet slipped on the wet floor. "Please, don't send me away," the little girl begged, still sitting on the floor. "I just wanted to keep everything clean for the other kids." Richard felt a tightness in his chest. The child's voice was fragile, but there was a determination that moved him deeply. He crouched down slowly, trying not to scare her further. "How did you get in here?" he asked, now in a gentler tone. "Through the back window." "It's broken," the girl answered, wiping her tears with the back of her dirty hands. "I saw lots of kids come here with their families. They deserve a clean bathroom just like I deserved one too." The child's words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He realized then that for the past few days, he'd been finding the bathroom spotless every morning, something he'd credited to Dorothy, his longest-serving employee. "What's your name?" Richard asked, reaching out to help her up. "Emma Grace," she replied, hesitating before accepting his hand. "But everyone calls me Emmy." When Richard touched the girl's hand, he felt how cold and rough it was, with calluses that shouldn't exist on a child's hands. His heart ached even more when he noticed how thin and fragile she was. "Where are your parents, Emmy?" The question made the girl's eyes fill with tears again. She lowered her head and stayed silent for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. "I don't have a mum or dad anymore," she whispered. "Now I live on the street." Richard's legs nearly gave way, a child so young living on the streets, working in the middle of the night to clean bathrooms for free. It was a reality he knew existed but had never faced so directly. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. "How long have you been doing this?" Richard asked, trying to process everything. "About 3 weeks," Emmy answered, still avoiding his gaze. "I watched the crowd during the day from across the street. I saw lots of families with kids come here. I thought if the bathrooms were always clean, the kids would feel happier." The simplicity and kindness behind that gesture left Richard completely moved. That child, going through hardships he couldn't even imagine, still thought about the well-being of other children. "And where do you sleep? What do you eat?" Emmy finally looked up, and Richard could see all the sadness in that young gaze, but also a strength and determination that impressed him. "I sleep in different places, sometimes under the bakery awning, sometimes on a bench in the square when it's not too busy," she explained. "For food, I ask people for help, or look for things in the trash that are still good." Richard ran a hand over his face, trying to steady his emotions. As a 58-year-old man who had faced his own tragedies, he knew suffering when he saw it. But a child's suffering stirred something in him he couldn't explain. "Why did you choose my restaurant?" "Because this place is special," Emmy answered, and for the first time she gave a small smile. "I came here once before, when I was really little. A really nice man gave me food one day. He had a good heart, just like you seem to." A chill ran down Richard's spine. There was something in those words that made him feel like he already knew this child from somewhere, but but he couldn't place where. Do you remember what that man looked like? I do. He was younger than you, but he had the same kind look in his eyes, Emmy said, studying Richard carefully. He gave me a sandwich and told me I was a very brave girl. Richard's heart raced. There was something familiar in the girl's description, but his memory was foggy. In the last few years, after losing his wife in an accident, he had sunk into deep depression, and many memories from that time were hazy. Emmy, would you like to have breakfast with me? Richard asked, feeling an inexplicable need to care for this child. The girl's eyes lit up in a way Richard had never seen before. It was as if someone had turned on a light inside her. Are you serious? She asked, almost disbelieving. I am. Let's go to the kitchen. I'll make something good for you. Emmy followed him with timid steps, still looking around as if she were in a palace. Richard noticed how she admired every detail of the restaurant, from the simple tables to the pictures on the wall. In the kitchen, Richard made a ham and cheese sandwich with a glass of warm milk. Emmy ate with desperate hunger, but tried to mind her manners, chewing slowly and wiping her mouth with her hand. Is it good? Richard asked, feeling a strange satisfaction watching her eat. It's the most delicious thing I've ever had, Emmy answered honestly. You're a really good cook. As she ate, Richard studied her every movement. There was something about Emmy that touched him in a way he couldn't explain. Maybe it was the memory of the daughter he and his wife had never been able to have, or maybe it was something deeper he didn't yet understand. Emmy, tell me how you ended up here. How is a girl so young living alone on the streets? The girl's face darkened again. She finished chewing and took a sip of milk before answering. My mom got really sick when I was 7, she began, her voice quiet. She couldn't take care of me anymore, so she took me to a place where they said they'd look after me. Richard knew she meant a shelter, but from the look on her face, the experience hadn't been good. But it wasn't a good place for you. Emmy shook her head, and Richard saw tears forming in her eyes. The people there were very mean. They yelled at us, didn't give us enough food, and some kids got hit when they did something wrong, she recounted. I tried to be a good girl, but one day I couldn't take it anymore and ran away. Richard felt anger rising inside him. How could anyone mistreat defenseless children? He wanted to hug Emmy and protect her from all the evil in the world. How long ago did you run away? Almost 2 years, she replied. At first it was really hard, but I learned to get by. There are good people who help me sometimes. 2 years. Richard could hardly believe a child of just 9 had survived 2 years alone on the streets. That little girl's strength was something he'd never seen before. And you never thought about seeking help? There are other places. I'm scared, Emmy interrupted. What if the new place is like the first one? What if they hurt me again? At least on the streets I can run if someone tries to hurt me. Richard understood her fear perfectly. After a traumatic experience, it was natural she'd be afraid to trust institutions again. Emmy, would you like to help me here at the restaurant? Richard asked, surprising even himself with the question. The girl's eyes widened with surprise and hope. Are you serious? I can really work here. Not exactly work, Richard quickly corrected. You're still a child and need to study. But you could help me with some simple tasks, and in return I'd make sure you have a safe place to sleep and food whenever you need it. Emmy started crying, but this time they were tears of joy. She jumped up from the chair and ran to hug Richard, catching him completely off guard. Thank you, thank you, thank you, she repeated, sobbing against his chest. You're an angel. Richard felt overwhelming emotion wash over him. It had been years since he'd felt such a strong connection with someone. It was as if Emmy had come into his life to fill a void he didn't even know existed. Just then, the restaurant's front door opened, and Dorothy, the longest-serving employee, came in to start her shift. She stopped in surprise when she saw Richard hugging a dirty, wet child. Good morning, Mr. Bennett, Dorothy greeted, clearly confused by the situation. Good morning, Dorothy. I'd like you to meet Emmy, Richard said, gently releasing the girl. She's going to help us here at the restaurant. Dorothy, a black woman of 62 who'd worked with Richard for over a decade, knew him well enough to sense something important was happening. She approached with a warm smile. Hello, sweetheart. It's so nice to meet you. Dorothy said, extending her hand to Emmy. "You seem like a very special little girl." Emmy shook Dorothy's hand shyly, but Richard could see she immediately took to the woman. "Dorothy, have you noticed the restrooms have been spotless lately?" Richard asked. "I have. I thought maybe the cleaning company had improved," she replied, curious. "That was Emmy. She'd come in the early morning and clean everything by herself, without asking for anything in return." Dorothy looked at the girl with an expression of astonishment and admiration. How could someone so small have such a generous heart? "Good Lord," Dorothy murmured. "Child, you truly are an angel." Emmy blushed at the praise, but Richard could see how good it made her feel to be recognized for her work. "Dorothy, could you help Emmy get cleaned up and maybe find some clean clothes for her?" Richard asked. "Of course," Dorothy replied immediately. "Come with me, dear. Let's get you all fixed up." While Dorothy was taking Emmy to the staff restroom, Richard Bennett found himself alone in the kitchen, trying to process everything that had happened that morning. In just an hour, his life had completely changed. He had met a child who touched his heart in a way he couldn't explain. But there was more. The story Emmy had told about the man who gave her food when she was little still bothered him. There was a familiarity in that story he couldn't ignore. Richard tried to recall the years after losing his wife. It had been a very difficult time. He had closed the restaurant for a few months and stayed home, drowning in depression. When he finally decided to reopen, he was emotionally fragile. He vaguely remembered occasions when he had given food to people in need. Back then, doing good for others was one of the few things that eased his pain. But the memories were hazy, as if they belonged to another life. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, back to the story. After about an hour, Dorothy returned with Emmy, who was completely transformed. The girl now wore a clean shirt and pants that, though slightly too big for her, made her look much more presentable. Her hair was brushed and clean, revealing an angelic face that had been hidden beneath the dirt. "Wow, Emmy, you look beautiful," Richard exclaimed, genuinely surprised by the change. Emmy smiled shyly, clearly feeling good about being clean and tidy. "Dorothy was really kind to me," she said. "She taught me how to brush my teeth properly and even put lotion on my skin." Richard looked at Dorothy with gratitude. He knew he could count on her, but the tender way she had cared for Emmy moved him deeply. "Emmy, how about I show you how the restaurant works?" Richard suggested. "If you're going to help us, you should know everything." The girl nodded eagerly, and Richard began showing her each area of the establishment. Emmy paid attention to every detail, asking smart questions about how things ran. "How many people work here?" she asked as she looked around the kitchen. "There are 5 of us. Besides me and Dorothy, there's Brian, who helps in the kitchen, Ashley, our waitress, and Mr. Jenkins, who handles general cleaning," Richard explained. "And how many meals do you serve each day?" The question surprised Richard. It was impressive how a 9-year-old could ask such mature questions about the business. "It depends on the day, but we usually serve between 80 and 100 dishes at lunch and about 50 at dinner." Emmy nodded, seeming to process the information. Richard could tell she was genuinely interested in understanding how everything worked. By 10 in the morning, the other employees started arriving. Brian, a 25-year-old, was the first and was surprised to see Emmy. "Hey, boss, who's this princess?" Brian asked with a friendly smile. "This is Emmy. She's going to help us here at the restaurant," Richard replied. Brian crouched down to Emmy's height and held out his hand. "Nice to meet you, Emmy. I'm Brian. Do you like cooking?" "I never really learned," Emmy admitted, "but I'd like to." "Well, you came to the right place. The boss here is one of the best cooks in Arlington," Brian said, winking at Richard. When Ashley arrived half an hour later, she was also curious about Emmy. Richard realized he'd need to explain the situation to his employees, but he wanted to do it in a way that protected the girl's privacy. "Everyone, Emmy is going through a tough time and will be staying with us for a while," Richard explained when they were all gathered. "She's a very special girl, and I'm sure you'll all come to love her." All the staff welcomed Emmy warmly, and Richard was deeply moved to see how his team, whom he considered family, immediately embraced her presence. During lunch, Richard noticed Emmy helping Dorothy organize the spices and clean the tables. The girl worked with impressive dedication, always striving to do everything as well as possible. "Mr. Bennet," Dorothy said when they had a moment alone, "may I ask what exactly is going on with the girl?" Richard briefly shared Emmy's story with Dorothy, who listened with growing concern and compassion. "My goodness, poor thing," Dorothy murmured. 2 years alone on the streets? How did she survive?" "I don't know, Dorothy, but she's incredibly strong, stronger than any child should ever have to be," Richard replied. "And what do you plan to do?" Dorothy asked. That was the question Richard had been avoiding, but he knew he had to face it. He couldn't just keep Emmy at the restaurant indefinitely without taking legal steps. "I don't know yet," Richard admitted. "For now, I just want her to feel safe and cared for. Then we'll figure out what can be done." Dorothy nodded understandingly. She had known Richard for years and knew he had a good heart, but she also understood the situation was complicated. That afternoon, when the restaurant was quieter, Richard sat down with Emmy to talk more about her life. "Emmy, you mentioned you remember the man who gave you food when you were little. Do you remember anything else about that day?" Emmy thought for a moment. "I remember being very hungry and very cold," she said. "My mom had gone to look for work and left me sitting on the sidewalk. I was crying a lot." Richard's heart ached at the image of Emmy, even smaller, alone and crying on the sidewalk. "And what happened when the man showed up?" "He came out of a place like this restaurant and saw me crying," Emmy continued. "He asked where my mum was and I told him she'd gone to find work. He went back inside and brought me a sandwich and some juice." Richard grew more and more intrigued. The story felt familiar, but he still couldn't place it clearly. "Do you remember anything else about that man?" "I remember he looked sad too," Emmy said. "His eyes were red, like he'd been crying. But he was still kind to me." An image began forming in Richard's mind. He remembered a specific time about 4 years ago when he had reopened the restaurant after losing his wife. Back then, he had been constantly crying, his eyes always red. "Emmy, do you remember if there was anything special about this restaurant back then? Any different decorations?" The girl closed her eyes, focusing on the memory. "There was a big picture of a very pretty lady on the wall," she said, pointing to a specific spot. "The man looked at the picture when he gave me the food and got even sadder." Richard felt as if he'd been struck by lightning. He remembered clearly now. Right after reopening, he had hung a large photo of his wife on the wall, a way to keep her close. The picture had stayed there for months until he decided to take it down. It hurt too much to see it every day. "My God," Richard murmured, his legs suddenly weak. "What's wrong, Mr. Bennet? Are you okay?" Emmy asked, worried. Richard looked into the girl's eyes and knew without a doubt. He remembered now. 4 years ago, on a particularly difficult day, he had seen a little girl crying on the sidewalk in front of the restaurant. Moved by compassion and his own pain, he had made a sandwich and brought it to her. "Emmy," Richard said, his voice choked. "I remember you." The girl's eyes widened. "You really remember?" "I do. You were so tiny. Must have been about 5 years old. You were sitting on the sidewalk right out front crying because your mum was late coming back." Emmy began to cry with emotion. "I knew it," she said between sobs. "I knew you were the kind man who helped me. That's why I chose this restaurant to clean. I wanted to repay the kindness you showed me." Richard could no longer hold back. He hugged Emmy and began to cry too. It was as if fate had conspired to bring them back together. "You cleaned the bathrooms to repay me?" Richard asked, still holding her. "Yes," Emmy replied. "You helped me when I needed it most, so I wanted to help you too. I didn't have money to pay for the food, but I knew how to clean. I learned by watching others." Richard was completely moved. That child's generosity was something he had never encountered before. Even after going through unimaginable hardships, she had found a way to return a simple act of kindness. "Emmy, you didn't owe me anything. That was a gift, not a loan." "I know," she said, pulling back slightly to look into his eyes. "But my mom taught me that good people deserve good things in return. You were kind to me, so I wanted to be kind to you too." Richard hugged Emmy again, feeling a mix of joy, sadness, and a determination he hadn't felt in years. He knew now he couldn't just let this special child walk out of his life again. "Emmy, would you like to live with me?" Richard asked, surprising even himself with the question. The girl looked at him, her eyes filled with both hope and fear. "Are you serious?" "I can really live with you." "I'm very serious," Richard confirmed. "It won't be easy to sort out all the paperwork, but I want you to be my daughter. If you want to, of course." Emmy began to cry again, but this time they were tears of pure happiness. "I do," she said, hugging Richard with all her strength. "I always dreamed of having a dad again." At that moment, Dorothy walked into the room and saw the two of them hugging and crying. "Everything all right here?" she asked, concerned. Richard lifted his head and smiled at Dorothy. "Everything's perfect, Dorothy. I just asked Emmy to be my daughter." Dorothy started crying too, moved by the scene before her. "Thank heavens!" she exclaimed. "You two were made for each other." In the days that followed, Richard began the process of formalizing Emmy's situation. He sought out a lawyer specializing in adoption and started learning all the necessary procedures. Meanwhile, Emmy adjusted to life at the restaurant. Richard had set up a small room in the back for her to stay in temporarily until they figured out a more permanent arrangement. The girl helped with simple tasks during the day and studied in the afternoon with books Richard had bought for her. It was amazing how bright she was and how quickly she learned. "Mr. Bennett," Emmy said one Thursday afternoon, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, ask me anything." "Why were you so sad that day when you gave me the sandwich?" Richard had been expecting this question and knew he had to be honest with Emmy. "I had lost the most important person in my life," he explained. "My wife had passed and I was feeling very lonely and sad. Did she travel far away?" Richard noticed that Emmy, in her innocence, hadn't understood he was referring to loss through death. "She went to heaven, Emmy. She got very sick and couldn't stay with me anymore." The little girl's eyes filled with understanding and sadness. "Just like my mum," she said softly. Richard felt his heart tighten. He'd forgotten that Emmy had also lost her mother. "Your mom went to heaven too?" "Yes. After she took me to that place, she got even sicker and couldn't get better," Emmy explained. "But I think she's happy now, seeing that I found you." Richard hugged Emmy, feeling an even deeper connection with her. Both had lost the most important people in their lives, and now they had found each other to heal each other's wounds. "You know what I think, Emmy," Richard said. "I think your mom and my wife are up in heaven, happy because we found each other." Emmy smiled through her tears. "I think so too. I think they planned everything so we could meet again." 2 weeks later, Richard received an unexpected visit at the restaurant. An elegant woman in her 40s came in during lunch hour and asked Ashley if she could speak to the owner. "Good afternoon, Mr. Bennett," the woman said as Richard approached. "My name is Miss Jennifer Parker. I'm a social worker with Arlington County Social Services." Richard's stomach twisted. He knew this moment would come, but he'd hoped for more time to sort out Emmy's situation. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How can I help you?" "I received a report that there's a minor working in this establishment under irregular circumstances," she said, getting straight to the point. Richard glanced around and saw Emmy helping Dorothy arrange napkins on the tables. The girl hadn't noticed the social worker yet. "Ma'am, I can explain the situation. Could we talk in my office?" Jennifer agreed and followed Richard to a small room at the back of the restaurant. Richard closed the door and began recounting the whole story, from the day he found Emmy cleaning the bathrooms. "I understand the situation, Mr. Bennett," Jennifer said when Richard finished. "But you must realize you can't simply keep a child without the proper legal procedures." "I know that, ma'am. I've already contacted a lawyer and we're starting the adoption process," Richard explained. "That's good, but until the process is completed, the child needs to be under state custody," Jennifer said. Panic surged through Richard. "Are you saying you're going to take Emmy away?" "It's standard procedure, Mr. Bennett. The child will be placed in temporary foster care while your adoption application is reviewed." "Please, Mom," Richard pleaded. "Emmy has already been through traumatic experiences in shelters. She's doing well here. She's eating properly. She's going to school. Please don't take her away." Jennifer seemed genuinely moved by Richard's appeal, but she had legal obligations. "Mr. Bennett, I understand your concern, but I must follow protocol. However, I can assess the situation and see if temporary guardianship is possible until the adoption is finalized." "What would that mean?" "It means the child could stay with you under state supervision until the adoption is formalized," Jennifer explained. Richard felt immense relief. It wasn't ideal, but it was far better than losing Emmy. "What do I need to do to get temporary guardianship?" "First, I need to speak with the child and evaluate her current situation," Jennifer said. "Later, I'll need to check your living conditions, your financial situation, and make sure the child is receiving all the necessary care." Richard nodded, understanding this was the price he'd have to pay to keep Emmy safe. "Can I call Emmy to talk to you?" "Yes, please." Richard left the office and called Emmy. The little girl came running, but when she saw the unfamiliar woman, her face filled with fear. "Emmy, this is Ms. Jennifer. She just wants to talk to you for a little bit," said Richard, trying to reassure her. Emmy clung to Richard's arm, clearly terrified. "Is she going to take me away?" she asked in a shaky voice. "No, sweetheart," Richard answered, though he wasn't sure if he was telling the truth. "She just wants to know if you're happy here." Jennifer crouched down to Emmy's level and spoke softly. "Hi, Emmy. I'm Jennifer, and I work with children like you. I just want to make sure you're happy and safe. Can you tell me what it's like living here?" Emmy looked at Richard for approval. He nodded encouragingly. "This is the best place in the world," Emmy said, still holding Richard's arm. "Mr. Richard takes care of me. Dorothy teaches me things, and everyone here treats me like family." "And do you go to school?" "Not yet, but Mr. Richard said next week I'll start at a real school," Emmy replied, brightening a little. Jennifer asked several more questions about Emmy's routine, her meals, her feelings, and her hopes for the future. Richard was impressed by the maturity of her answers and the warmth in her voice as she talked about her new life. "Emmy, can you go play for a bit while I talk more with Mr. Richard?" Jennifer asked. Emmy left, but Richard could see she was worried about how the conversation would go. "Mr. Bennett, I need to be honest with you," Jennifer said once they were alone again. "The child is clearly well cared for and happy. That's rare in situations like this." Richard felt a flicker of hope. "But there's still an issue," Jennifer continued. "You're keeping the child in a commercial establishment. That's not suitable for permanent housing." "I know, Ms. Jennifer. I'm looking for a house to rent. The room she's using here is just temporary." "That's good. I'll give you 2 weeks to find proper housing and enroll her in school. If those conditions are met, I can recommend temporary guardianship." Richard felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Thank you so much, Ms. Jennifer. You have no idea what this means to me and Emmy." "Mr. Bennett, I can see you truly care for this child," Jennifer said, "but I need you to understand I'll be keeping an eye on things. If I notice anything that could harm her well-being, I'll have to take stronger measures." "I understand completely, Ms. Jennifer. Emmy is the most important thing in my life now. I'll do everything to give her the best life possible." After Jennifer left, Richard called Emmy to talk. "So, is she taking me away?" Emmy asked, her eyes full of fear. "No, sweetheart, but we do have to make some changes," Richard explained. "First, we're going to find a house to live in together. Second, you'll start at a real school." Emmy's face lit up. "A house just for us, really? Really, with a room for you, a room for me, a living room, a kitchen, a backyard? Everything." Emmy started jumping with joy, and Richard felt happier than he had in years. In the days that followed, Richard threw himself into searching for a house. He wanted something close to the restaurant so he could keep managing the business, but it also needed to be a proper home for Emmy. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, back to the story. After visiting about 10 properties, Richard found the perfect house. It was a simple home with 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a small backyard with a mango tree. It was just 5 blocks from the restaurant and in a safe, quiet neighborhood. "Emmy, do you want to come with me to see our new house?" Richard asked one Tuesday afternoon. The little girl could hardly contain her excitement. The whole way there, she asked 1,000 questions about what it would be like to live there. When they arrived in front of the house, Richard held Emmy's hand before opening the gate. "Ready to see our home?" he asked. Emmy nodded eagerly, and Richard opened the front door. The house was empty, but Richard could already picture it furnished. Emmy ran through every room, delighted by every little detail. "Is this going to be my room?" she asked, stopping at the door of the smaller bedroom. "If you want it to be," Richard replied. "Or you can pick the other one, it's bigger." "No, this one is perfect," Emmy said. "It has a window facing the backyard. I can see the mango tree." Richard smiled at her genuine happiness. For a girl who had spent years sleeping on the streets, any room would have felt like a palace. "Is there a school nearby?" Emmy asked. "Yes, just 3 blocks away. Tomorrow, we'll go enroll you." That night, when they returned to the restaurant, Emmy was more excited than Richard had ever seen her. She told all the staff about the new house, describing every detail with enthusiasm. "Dorothy, you can come visit us at the new house," Emmy said, hugging the employee. "Of course I will, sweetheart," Dorothy replied, touched. "And you'll have to teach me how to make brigadeiros because in your new house, you'll have your own stove." The next day, Richard and Emmy went to Jefferson Elementary School to enroll. The principal, Mrs. Thompson, a gray-haired woman in her 60s, greeted them personally. "So Emmy will be joining us," Mrs. Thompson said with a warm smile. "How wonderful! It's been a while since we've had a new student." Richard had briefly explained Emmy's situation to the principal, without going into too much detail, but making it clear she had faced hardships and needed extra care. "Emmy, do you know how to read and write?" Mrs. Thompson asked. "A little," Emmy replied shyly. "A lady who lived on the street taught me some things." "That's great. We'll do a quick assessment to see which grade would be best for you," the principal said. After a basic evaluation, they decided Emmy should start in 2nd grade, appropriate for her age but with extra tutoring to help her catch up. "When can I start?" Emmy asked eagerly. "How about next Monday?" Mrs. Thompson suggested. "Really?" Emmy looked at Richard for confirmation. "Really?" Richard said. "On Monday you'll be a real student." Emmy started jumping for joy right there in the principal's office, making Richard and Mrs. Thompson laugh. Over the weekend, Richard and Emmy focused on furnishing their new home. They went to several stores to buy basics: beds, dressers, a dining table, a sofa, a refrigerator. Richard noticed Emmy had strong opinions about the decor. She wanted bright colors and suggested painting one wall of her bedroom yellow because it was the color of happiness. "Where did you learn that yellow is the color of happiness?" asked Richard while they picked out the paint. "A lady who gave me food once told me that," answered Emmy. "She said that every time I saw yellow, I should remember there are good things in the world." Richard once again felt how Emmy had found strength and wisdom in small acts of kindness from strangers. He decided they wouldn't just paint one wall yellow, they'd also buy yellow curtains and throw pillows. On Sunday night, they slept in their new home for the first time. Richard had set up Emmy's bed first, wanting to make sure she had a good night's sleep before her first day of school. "Mr. Richard," Emmy said when he came to tuck her in. "Yes, sweetheart." "Thank you for giving me a family again." Richard kissed Emmy's forehead and felt tears in his eyes. "Thank you for giving me a daughter again." On Monday morning, Richard woke up before the alarm. He was more nervous than Emmy about her first day of school. "Good morning, kiddo," he said when Emmy appeared in the kitchen, already dressed in her new school uniform. "Good morning, Dad," Emmy replied, and Richard's heart swelled with love, hearing her call him Dad for the first time. They had breakfast together, and Richard noticed Emmy was a little nervous too. "Are you scared?" he asked. "A little," she admitted. "What if the other kids don't like me?" "Impossible," Richard said firmly. "You're the most special girl in the world. Any kid would be lucky to have you as a friend." Richard walked Emmy to school and spoke with her teacher, Ms. Wilson, a kind young woman who promised to take good care of her new student. "Emmy, if you need anything, just ask your teacher to call me," Richard said before leaving. "Okay, Dad, will you pick me up after school?" "Of course, I'll be here at 5:30 sharp." Richard left the school with a tightness in his chest. It was the first time he'd been apart from Emmy for so many hours since they'd found each other again. At the restaurant, Richard could barely focus on work. He kept checking the clock every 5 minutes. counting down the time until he could pick up Emmy. "Mr. Richard, you're more nervous than a first-time dad," Dorothy teased. "That's because I am a first-time dad," Richard replied, laughing at himself. At 5:20, Richard was already waiting outside the school for Emmy. When she came running toward him with a huge smile, he felt like everything was worth it. "Dad! Dad!" Emmy shouted, jumping into his arms. School was amazing. "Tell me everything," Richard said, hugging her tight. "Ms. Wilson is really nice. The boys in my class taught me how to play soccer. Olivia let me borrow her crayons, and I even finished my math homework." Richard listened as Emmy recounted her day, feeling a happiness he never knew existed. Watching a child discover the world through education was something magical. "And tomorrow I get to use the library," Emmy continued. "The teacher said I can borrow books to read at home." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Richard said. "When we get home, you can tell me all about it in more detail." The following week settled into a perfect routine for Richard and Emmy. Every morning, he took her to school, then went to work at the restaurant. In the afternoon, he picked her up, and she always had 1,000 new stories to share. After dinner, they did homework together. Richard discovered he was really good at helping Emmy with her studies, and she was improving quickly. A month after school started, Ms. Wilson asked to speak with Richard. "Mr. Bennett, I wanted to talk about Emmy's progress," said the teacher. Richard grew worried, thinking there might be a problem. "Is she adjusting well?" "Better than well," replied Ms. Wilson with a smile. "Emmy is one of the most dedicated students I've ever had. She's not only catching up quickly on what she missed, but she's also helping other students who are struggling." Richard felt immense pride. "She's always been very generous," he said. "On top of that, she has an impressive emotional maturity for her age. The other children go to her when they have problems, and she always finds a way to help." Richard wasn't surprised. Emmy had gone through experiences that forced her to grow up fast, but she'd managed to keep her kindness and generosity intact. 2 months after Emmy started school, Richard received another visit from Ms. Jennifer Parker. This time she was smiling. "Mr. Bennett, I've come to do the final evaluation for the temporary guardianship process." Richard was nervous, but confident. He knew he'd done everything in his power to give Emmy the best life possible. Jennifer inspected the house, talked to Emmy about her school routine, and even visited the school to speak with the principal and teacher. "Mr. Bennett," Jennifer said when she finished the evaluation, "I rarely see an adoption situation work out this well in such a short time." Richard felt an enormous wave of relief. The child is clearly happy, healthy, and thriving. The home is suitable, the school is pleased with her progress, and it's obvious there's a very strong bond between the two of you. "Does that mean—" "It means I'll recommend not just temporary guardianship, but that the adoption process be expedited," Jennifer said. "In cases like this, where the child's well-being is clearly being met, we can fast-track the paperwork." Richard had to sit down. The emotion was overwhelming. "How long do you think it will take?" "If everything goes smoothly, the adoption could be finalized in 3 months," Jennifer replied. That night, Richard told Emmy about his conversation with Ms. Parker. "Does that mean I'll officially be your daughter?" Emmy asked, her eyes shining. "That's right, sweetheart. In a few months you'll have my last name and I'll legally be your father." Emmy hugged Richard so tightly he nearly lost his balance. "I'll be Emma Grace Bennett," she said, testing how the name sounded. "What do you think of it?" "It's the most beautiful name in the world." 3 months later, on a sunny Thursday morning, Richard and Emmy were at the Arlington County Courthouse for the final adoption hearing. Emmy wore a new yellow dress Richard had bought especially for the occasion. She was nervous, but excited. "Dad, after today, no one can ever separate us, right?" she asked as they waited to be called. "Never again, honey. After today, we're family forever." When they were called before the judge, Richard held Emmy's hand firmly. Judge Robert Williams, the judge overseeing the case, was a kind man in his 50s. "Mr. Bennett and Emmy," the judge said, "we're here today to formalize something that clearly already exists, a family." The judge asked Richard some routine questions about his ability to provide for Emmy and asked her a few simple questions about how she felt living with him. Emmy, are you absolutely sure you want Mr. Bennet to be your father forever? The judge asked. Yes, Emmy answered with conviction. He's the best dad in the world. The judge smiled and banged his gavel. Then I hereby declare that Emma Grace is now the adopted daughter of Richard Bennet, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Congratulations to the new family. Richard and Emmy hugged each other, crying with joy. Dorothy, who had been called as a witness, was also moved to tears. After the hearing, they went straight to the restaurant, where the staff had prepared a small celebration. Brian had made a cake with the words, "Welcome to the family, Emmy," decorated with yellow whipped cream. "Everyone," Richard said, raising a glass of soda. "I'd like to toast to Emmy, who gave me back my joy for life and taught me that family is built with love, not just blood." Everyone raised their glasses, and Emmy beamed with happiness. "Now I want to make a speech too," Emmy said, climbing onto a chair to stand taller. "Go ahead, Princess," Brian encouraged. "I want to thank my dad for giving me a family," Emmy began, "and I want to thank all of you for accepting me as part of the restaurant family too. You're the best aunts and uncles a girl could ask for." Everyone applauded, many with tears in their eyes. 6 months after the adoption, Richard and Emmy's lives had settled into a happy and productive routine. Emmy was one of the top students in her class and had made many friends at school. Richard had also made some changes at the restaurant. Inspired by Emmy's generosity, he started a program where, on Saturday mornings, he offered free breakfast to underprivileged children in the neighborhood. "Dad," Emmy said one Saturday morning as she helped serve breakfast to the other kids, "do you remember when I used to clean the bathrooms in secret?" "Of course I do, sweetheart." "Why?" "I was thinking maybe other kids want to help too, but don't know how. What if we taught them how to really help?" Richard was struck by the maturity of Emmy's idea. "What do you have in mind?" "What if, on Saturday afternoons after breakfast, we taught the kids how to cook simple dishes? That way, they learn a useful skill and can help their families at home." Richard hugged Emmy, once again amazed by his daughter's kindness. "That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. Let's start next Saturday." The Little Chefs program became a hit in the neighborhood. Every week, about 15 kids came to the restaurant to learn simple, nutritious recipes. Emmy became a sort of assistant to Richard, helping the younger kids and explaining instructions in a way they could understand better. "Emmy has a gift for teaching," Dorothy remarked to Richard one afternoon. "I think she'll be a teacher when she grows up." "She has a gift for everything," Richard replied proudly. "But most importantly, she has a good heart." A year after the adoption, Richard was organizing a surprise birthday party for Emmy. It would be the first real birthday party she'd ever had, and Richard wanted it to be special. He had invited all of Emmy's school friends, the restaurant staff, Mrs. Thompson and Ms. Wilson from school, and even Ms. Jennifer Parker, who had become a family friend. "Dad, why are you being so secretive today?" Emmy asked on the morning of her birthday. "I'm not being secretive," Richard lied. "It's just a normal day." Emmy didn't believe him but played along. At 4 in the afternoon, when they arrived at the restaurant, all the lights were off. "How strange," Richard said, feigning surprise. "Could the power be out?" When Richard turned on the lights, over 20 people shouted, "Surprise!" Emmy was so shocked and touched that she burst into tears. The restaurant was decorated with yellow balloons and posters with photos of Emmy from the past few months. Brian had made a giant chocolate cake with 10 candles. "Dad, did you do all this for me?" Emmy asked, still in disbelief. "Just for you and no one else, my princess. The party was perfect. Emmy played with her friends, got presents and ate so much cake that Richard got worried she might get sick. At the end of the party, when only Richard, Emmy and Dorothy were left at the restaurant, Emmy went up to her dad. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Anything you want." "Next year, for my birthday, can we also throw a party for the kids in the program? Many of them have never had a birthday party." Richard smiled, once again amazed by his daughter's generosity. "Of course we can. How about we throw a group birthday party for all the kids who have birthdays in the same month?" "That would be amazing," Emmy exclaimed, jumping with joy. 2 years after the adoption, Richard was in the restaurant kitchen preparing lunch when Emmy came home from school earlier than usual. "Dad, something happened at school today," she said, looking worried. Richard immediately stopped what he was doing and gave Emmy his full attention. "What is it, sweetheart?" "There's a new girl in my class. Her name is Olivia," Emmy told him. "She seems really sad and said she's living in a shelter because she doesn't have a family." Richard already knew where this conversation was going. "And you want to help her?" "Yes, I do. I remember how it felt to be alone and scared. I think Olivia must be feeling the same way I did." Richard felt an immense pride in Emmy's empathy. "What do you have in mind?" "Can I invite her to come here to the restaurant so she can meet our family and see there are good people in the world?" "Of course you can. Tomorrow when you go to school, invite her to have lunch with us on Saturday." On Saturday, Emmy arrived at the restaurant with Olivia, an 8-year-old girl, thin and shy, wearing clothes that were clearly not new. "Dad, this is Olivia," Emmy introduced her. "Olivia, this is my dad, Richard." Richard crouched down to Olivia's height and held out his hand. "Nice to meet you, Olivia. Emmy has told me a lot about you." Olivia shook Richard's hand timidly, but he could see in her eyes the same mix of fear and hope he'd seen in Emmy's eyes 2 years earlier. "Are you two hungry?" Richard asked. "Yes," Emmy replied. "Olivia, you'll see how good my dad's cooking is." Richard prepared a special lunch for the girls: rice, beans, steak with onions, and fries. Olivia ate with the same desperate hunger Emmy had shown on her first day. "Do you like it, Olivia?" Emmy asked. "It's really good," Olivia answered softly. "It's been a long time since I've had food this good." Richard felt his heart ache. Even after 2 years of raising Emmy, it was still hard for him to accept that there were children going without. After lunch, Emmy showed Olivia around the restaurant, telling her own story of how she'd ended up there. "You really lived on the streets?" Olivia asked, amazed. "I did. But now I have a real family, and you can have one too someday." Richard watched the girls' conversation, seeing how Emmy was becoming a source of hope for Olivia. "Emmy told me you used to clean bathrooms in secret," Olivia said. "I did," Emmy corrected. "But now I don't have to do that anymore. Now I really help my dad, and he pays me with lots of love and care." Olivia smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. "Your dad seems really nice." "He's the best dad in the world," Emmy said, "and I'm sure there's a special dad or mum waiting for you too." Richard had to walk away to keep from crying. Seeing Emmy use her own experience to give hope to another child was one of the most beautiful things he had ever witnessed. When it was time for Olivia to return to the shelter, Richard walked her to the door. "Olivia, you can come here whenever you want," said Richard. "Our family will always have a place for you." "Thank you, Mr. Bennett," said Olivia, and for the first time she smiled at him. After Olivia left, Richard talked to Emmy about the experience. "How did you feel helping Olivia today?" "I felt really good," Emmy replied. "I remembered how important it was for me to know there were good people in the world. I think I made Olivia feel a little less alone." "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You're becoming a wonderful person." "It's because I had a good example," said Emmy, hugging Richard. Olivia began visiting the restaurant every Saturday. Gradually, she opened up more and shared her story. Her parents had passed away in an accident, and she had no other relatives. She had been in the shelter for 6 months and was losing hope of finding a family. Richard and Emmy did everything they could to show Olivia she was special and deserved to be loved. Little by little, she regained her confidence and joy. 3 months later, during one of Olivia's visits, Richard made a decision that even surprised himself. "Olivia," he said after lunch, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, Mr. Bennett. Would you like to be my daughter too?" Olivia was so surprised she nearly choked on her juice. "Are you serious?" "Very serious. Emmy and I talked about it, and we'd both love for you to be part of our family." Olivia looked at Emmy, who was smiling encouragingly. "You want me to be your sister?" Olivia asked. "More than anything in the world," Emmy replied. "I've always wanted a sister, and you're perfect." Olivia started to cry, but this time they were tears of happiness. "I'd love to," she said, running to hug Richard and Emmy at the same time. The adoption process for Olivia was more complicated than Emmy's because she was officially under state custody. But Richard was determined to overcome any obstacle. With the help of Ms. Jennifer Parker, who had become the family's advocate, Richard managed to start the process. Olivia began living temporarily with Richard and Emmy while the legal matters were resolved. Olivia's adjustment was easier than Emmy's because she had Emmy as a role model and guide. The two girls became inseparable, and Richard found himself the father of two wonderful daughters. 6 months later, Olivia's adoption was finalized. Now Richard had two official daughters, Emma Grace Bennett and Olivia Bennett. At the celebration party for Olivia's adoption, Richard gave an emotional speech. 3 years ago, I was a lonely and bitter man, he began. Then Emmy came into my life and taught me what it means to love unconditionally. Now with Olivia too, I have a complete family, and I'm the happiest man in the world. And we're the happiest girls in the world, shouted Emmy, speaking for herself and Olivia. 5 years after finding Emmy cleaning the restaurant bathrooms, Richard attended her elementary school graduation. Emmy was among the top students in her class and had been chosen to give the farewell speech. When I was little, I learned that small acts of kindness can change entire lives, Emmy said into the microphone, looking straight at Richard in the audience. A man gave me a sandwich when I was hungry, and years later, when I tried to repay that kindness, I ended up gaining a family. Richard was crying with pride. I want to tell all of you never to underestimate the power of an act of kindness, Emmy continued. You never know how a simple gesture can change someone's life. After the graduation, the family went to a special restaurant to celebrate. Olivia, now 11 years old, was also excelling in school and following in her older sister's footsteps. Dad, Emmy said during dinner, when I grow up, I want to have a restaurant just like yours, but specifically to help children in need. And I want to help you, Olivia chimed in immediately. Richard smiled, knowing his daughters had inherited not just his name, but also his desire to help others. I'm sure you two will do amazing things, Richard said, and I'll be here to support you every step of the way. 10 years after finding Emmy, Richard was now 68. The restaurant had expanded and become a model for social responsibility in Arlington. Emmy, now 19, was studying culinary arts in college and working at the restaurant in her free time. Olivia, 16, was finishing high school and had already decided she also wanted to work in food and social outreach. The Little Chefs program had grown and now served over 50 children every week. Richard had hired more staff and turned part of the restaurant into a culinary training center for underprivileged youth. Dad, Emmy said one Sunday morning as they had breakfast at home, do you remember when you asked me why I cleaned the bathrooms? I do. You said you wanted to repay the kindness I showed you years before. Exactly. I've been thinking, my whole life has been about paying kindness forward. You gave me a family, so I wanted to help Olivia have one too. You gave me an education, so I want to educate other children. Richard listened carefully, impressed once again by her maturity. You know what I've realized, Emmy continued. Kindness is like a circle. When you do good for someone, that person wants to do good for someone else, and so on. It never ends. That's a beautiful philosophy, sweetheart. And it's one I learned from you, Emmy said, hugging Richard. Thank you for teaching me that life is about taking care of each other. The end. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share, leave us an honest comment. Do you think Richard made the right decision adopting Emmy? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss another heartwarming story.